This is Agriculture Today, and I'm Shelby Varner with the K-State Radio Network. Starting today's show is former longtime host and producer of Agriculture Today, Eric Atkinson, as he comes back to recap the 100 years of Agriculture Today. He recognizes the people like Paul DeWeese who helped make the program what it is. He also explains the changes that Agriculture Today has gone through in the last 100 years. K-State dairy specialist Mike Brouk ends the show as he says forage, stocking density, resting areas, slip-resistant flooring, and carefully moving cows can reduce stress and improve the health, production, pregnancy rate, and longevity of the herd. That and more is coming up ahead. You're tuned in to Agriculture Today, and we start our Tuesday show taking the time to recognize the long history of Agriculture Today, as December 1st is 100 years of Agriculture Today on the K-State Radio Network. And in to talk about it, we're joined by former longtime host and producer of Agriculture Today, Eric Atkinson. Eric, thanks for joining us today.
Shelby, it's great to be back with you, and it's really unusual to be on this side of the interview microphones, but looking forward to our conversation about the 100 years of Agriculture Today.
And taking a look actually before we have 100 years of radio at Kansas State University, and what was that first broadcast communication that was produced for farmers and ranchers?
As we were talking prior to the interview here, there's so much history of radio at Kansas State University, period. K-State was a true pioneer in educational radio, and we can't crowd all of what we should share into this time slot that we have available to us today. But where it started was back in the early 1900s, actually. The physics department here at K-State in particular was really interested in this newfangled emerging medium called radio, and was tinkering with it and trying to figure out how it could be useful in an educational sense. Fast forward a little bit to, I believe it was 1912, and that is when the university started a service for agricultural producers, farmers, and ranchers. They were providing, in effect, the first weather reports over the air west of the Mississippi ever. What they were doing was they were sending out weather reports daily in Morse code, and producers had access to what were called crystal detectors. They could receive the code, and they would learn Morse code enough to decipher those daily weather forecasts. So, again, those were really pioneering in their way. This was over what was called at the time the station 9YV, the call letters. That kind of got it rolling. But you fast forward a bit, and we're skipping a lot of history here, regrettably, but you fast forward to the early 1920s. K-State had realized that there is a great value in utilizing radio as a means of sharing information and actually conducting college courses with people who could not be on the campus, doing so over the air. They actually partnered, I believe it was in 1922, with WDAF radio in Kansas City. And what would happen was speakers from the college would deliver lectures on the air one night a week over WDAF, which has a huge reach, of course. But it became prohibitive to actually drive the 200 miles. It's not quite 200 miles, but drive the 150 miles or so back and forth from Manhattan to Kansas City to do that on the part of these lecturers. So in 1923, a gentleman by the name of Sam Pickard, who was the extension editor at K-State at that time, approached Dr. John Brinkley, who was running KFKB radio in Milford. Now, if anybody's heard the story about Dr. Brinkley, they know it's a very colorful one and so forth. We won't spend a lot of time on that today. But what they did was they reached an agreement with Dr. Brinkley to carry what was called the College of the Air over KFKB, and that included 2 speakers each night, faculty members from the university, 5 nights a week for 10 weeks, and they would cover a number of subjects, many of them agriculture, such as dairy, poultry, beef cattle, others like cooking, sewing, child care, and so forth. And students would sign up to listen, and they would take an examination of the subjects of their choice later on for college credit. Immensely popular, wildly popular. A lot of folks took advantage of that, and that got folks to thinking then about what can we do to really maximize the opportunity of radio from this point forward. And that led to the establishment of KSAC.
So how did radio get established and agriculture being a part of that radio happen at Kansas State University?
Well, at the time, the president of K-State was Dr. William Jardine, and he and others had seen the value of this College of the Air. So they approached the Kansas legislature asking for an appropriation of $29,000 to establish a 500-watt transmitter and 2 towers to hold an antenna to create a radio station in and of itself at K-State. And the legislature agreed. So after all the mechanics were dealt with, all the construction was done, on December the 1st, 1924, KSAC went on the air. And that's why we're here to discuss it today, because December the 1st is coming up here this very Sunday. And so that will mark the centennial of that event. 1924, December the 1st. KSAC went on the air, and it had the College of the Air concept. It also had what we know now as the Agriculture Today, but was known then as the Farm Hour program each day at noon.
What did that Farm Hour program look like?
Well, Farm Hour carried what you typically would think it would carry, and I mentioned several of the topics: information, lectures primarily on crops, livestock, dairying, poultry, agricultural economics, foods, mechanics, radio, and other general subjects. And that ran 5 nights a week, again from 7 until 8 o'clock in the evening. Largely in lecture format, as I understand it. It wasn't really an interview or conversation format like we're talking about today. And it continued to grow, continued to draw audiences, and so forth. We might fast forward a little bit. The Farm Hour in the mid-'50s took on this kind of format just to give folks a flavor of what it was about. And it was very structured because it was still more or less a lecture format. It was still an hour long from 12:30 to 1:30. And at that time, in 1954, each day had 15 minutes of news and weather and markets. And then on Mondays, the topics covered were agricultural economics, farm management and the markets. Tuesday, agronomy, timely topics, and USDA ASCS reports, ASCS now known as the Farm Service Agency. On Wednesday, dairy, poultry, county agent reports, and Board of Agriculture reports. On Thursday, horticulture, ag engineering, extension news, and county agent reports. And on Friday, animal husbandry, extension news, and county agent reports. Also on Saturday, 4-H club programs and news were featured. So that was how it was organized, very organized, as you can tell, back in 1954.
Was there a person helping put that all together, or was it really the lecturers, professors coming in and talking about it?
There were folks involved, for sure, since the inception. And I did some light research to try to pin some of these folks down. But here are some of the folks who presided over the KSAC Farm Hour. Kenneth Gapin was early on a participant, and he eventually became the USDA radio TV chief in the 40s and 50s once he left KSAC. And then during World War II, an individual by the name of Miriam Dexter conducted the Farm Hour and also provided other services to share with Kansas radio stations as far as audio was concerned. In 1948, an individual by the name of Grant Salisbury was named the radio specialist and was directing the Farm Hour. And he was, for what it's worth, the younger brother of Morse Salisbury, who was the second USDA radio chief. So there's a lot of connectivity there. There was an individual called Jim Chapman. He was involved at one point in the various aspects of the Farm Hour and some other services. One individual who I have a name only, I guess I should say, is Frank Jones. I know he was involved. I don't know what time frame, but he was a producer at one time. And then eventually it came around to an individual who was the one who really put Agriculture Today on the map in the 60s and beyond, and that was Paul DeWeese.
as we talk more about Paul and how notable he was here for the transition of the Farm Hour becoming Agriculture Today.
Very much so. Paul was involved with KSAC Radio from 1948 until his passing in 1982. And he had a lot of duties involved with the station at that time as an announcer, as a producer, so on and so forth, doing some agricultural programming apparently, although I can't quite find the history that sorts all that out. But he was definitely involved. In 1961, he was the host of Agriculture Today, and it was called the Farm Hour up to that point. But they changed the name to Agriculture Today in 61, and they changed more or less how it was being conducted. Up to that point, the Farm Hour had been a series of lectures or read scripts, very structured, very lecture-oriented, let's put it that way. When Paul came in 61, he wanted to change the tone of it a bit. And so instead of it being fully prepared lectures, he, because of his tremendous interviewing skills, chose to orient the program more toward conversations with specialists, researchers, others associated with agriculture and associated with the university. So it became, much like it is today, a give and take between host and the guests. And it was extremely, extremely popular, obviously. Paul continued on and was, in 1966, named the full-time agriculture director for KSAC Radio. So his focus was entirely on agriculture at that point. And he became very rapidly known as the Dean of Farm Broadcasters in the Midwest.
We're cutting to a short break now on Agriculture Today, but when we come back, we'll once again be joined by Eric Atkinson as he continues to help us recap the 100 years of Agriculture Today. You're tuned back into Agriculture Today, and we continue our show and conversation with former longtime host and producer of Agriculture Today, Eric Atkinson, as we recap the 100 years of Agriculture Today with the K-State Radio Network. Eric, in our last segment, you ended mentioning that Paul DeWeese was seen as the Dean of Farm Broadcasters in the Midwest, and you continue to share with us why that is.
A lot of that has to do with his tremendous work on Agriculture Today, and one of the greatest radio voices ever. If anybody's ever heard recordings or actually heard him broadcast, they would attest to that. But he also produced a number of materials that went out via audio tapes to numerous radio stations throughout not only Kansas and the Midwest via the K-State Radio Network, on which we talk today. And those went out and were heard broadly, and he was so skilled at it and so expertised in the subjects of agriculture. He was known by his peers as the Dean of Agricultural Broadcasting or Farm Broadcasters in the Midwest all those years. Just an exceptional individual who really built the program into what it's been for the last 30 years or so.
And within those last 30, 40 years, Eric, you joined the team of Agriculture Today.
I was very fortunate. Back in 1983, I believe I said Paul was involved from 48 to 82. I misspoke. That would have been 83. He unfortunately passed away in March of 1983. I was given a call by an individual who was involved at K-State and KSAC to let me know what had happened and was informing me of what was happening in terms of replacing Paul or at least filling the position. So, long story short, applied and had the very good fortune, to say the least, of being invited to come to work for KSAC Radio, and I was certainly more than thrilled. It's hard to describe. So I began in July 1st of 1983, and didn't have any intention of changing anything. And I was still kind of in awe, starstruck by the notion of being the one who followed Paul DeWeese, which was a tall order. And he had done so many good things with the program that certainly wasn't going to change that. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. So I basically picked up where he left off as far as the structure and how things were done with Agriculture Today. And only things that I really changed, Shelby, would be that I decided that maybe we needed to do more of a regular agricultural markets reportage than we were doing previous because it was kind of hit and miss at the time, have something regular on a Monday and a Friday. So on Mondays, I was able to coerce the then livestock economist Mike Sands to do something weekly with us for a Monday broadcast. And at that time, the grain market economist, extension specialist Bill Tierney, to do Friday broadcasts with us, in which they both agreed to do. So those became regular staples of Agriculture Today on the bookends of each week. So that was one program change. But beyond that, I really didn't see any need to fix things because there was nothing to fix. It was a really well-run, organized program then, and it was just my job to keep it rolling that way. We have been more aggressive possibly over the years in getting guest speakers as they come into campus. Number of lectures, the Kling Anderson lecture, Elmer Heine lecture, the Henry Gardner lecture more recently, alumni fellows, the Roscoe Ellis lecture series, so on and so forth, all these agriculture-oriented opportunities to interview these people that come in and share their expertise with folks on the campus. So try to incorporate them quite a bit. And there was one more thing that we eventually got going, and that was having a weekly weather feature at the end of the week on Fridays. And I can't remember what year it was, but I approached Mary Knapp, then the state climatologist, to see if she would be interested in doing that, and she certainly was, and that continued, and now Chip Redmond, upon Mary's retirement, has taken up the mantle and is doing that. So another feature. But again, not major changes, because what was working well still works well to this day.
How have you seen from your time and when you look at the history, K-State Radio support agriculture farmers and ranchers?
Interesting question. I'd like to say that's what we do part and parcel every day. That's the purpose of our function here as an outreach to farmers and ranchers in Kansas and beyond. There have been times where farming and ranching has not been so rosy. The 85 farm crisis immediately comes to mind. It's not an easy question to answer other than continuing to put out information that can help producers weather the storm, and in this case, largely an economic storm. Managing the farm or ranch has always been a hallmark, but was especially so back in that time, 85, 86, 87. Figuring out how to buckle down, figuring out how to make ends meet when commodity prices were so low. So try to put more of an emphasis on that during those times, even more so than normal. There have been things that have cropped up during difficult times, program-wise at the university, and I think of a couple of things. The Farm Analyst Program, both of these are out of the Department of Agricultural Economics. The Farm Analyst Program was created to help producers walk through their financial situations and figure out what paths could help them get in a better place economically. And we regularly had Dwayne Hund and others involved in that program come in and talk about those ideas and promote that program to producers to be part of it and be of help to them. The Kansas Agricultural Mediation Service emerged largely from the 80s as well, and it is designed to help producers navigate difficulties in rather dire financial situations like bankruptcy and other possible dark times, if you will. And we certainly worked with Forrest Bueller and the group over there with a number of broadcasts as part of Agriculture Today during those times. We certainly stayed on top of policy development when farm bills came around with the late Barry Flinchbaugh, for sure, discussing at length things that were going on there, and others since. Jenny Ift is involved in that now. But those are the sorts of things that we tried to put out there in a timely fashion, and always do, to make sure that producers have all the tools in their toolbox to make decisions when things aren't exactly as rosy as we'd like them to be.
Eric, as you spent 39 years as the host of Agriculture Today and have taken the time to research beyond that for Agriculture Today, what do you always hope is being provided to farmers and ranchers in Kansas?
Well, the mission hasn't changed a lick from the early days. We use this phrase often in extension and more broadly for the university, taking the university to the people. That was stated from day one, and it remains that to this day. My hope is that we will continue to do what we're doing in sharing the latest cutting-edge research information from our specialists and researchers here at the university to keep those who they're working for fully informed on what's being accomplished and how those pieces of information can be applied to their farming and ranching enterprises. It really is a simple goal, Shelby. It's not rocket science. It's really very straightforward. It's nothing, out of the ordinary. It's something that is just a standard charge that I hope we would continue to do. And having said that, the success of agriculture today is almost solely, not necessarily on the hosts, not necessarily on the producers. It is on the people who have contributed as researchers, as specialists, and are here on a routine basis. They're the ones that bring the juice. They're the ones that bring the information. They're the ones that make this worthwhile. And there are scores of them, of course, over the many years that have contributed here. But they're the individuals who make this thing tick. And without them, it really goes nowhere. So I'm so glad to see that we can perpetuate this generation to generation, decade to decade, and keep that momentum going toward that end. And that's all on the willingness and the knowledge and the capabilities of all of these researchers and specialists that have been featured in the past and continue to be featured here on Agriculture Today.
Eric, I appreciate you taking the time to join us today and celebrate 100 years of Agriculture Today being on the radio.
Thank you, Shelby. And I do want to mention one more thing regarding the centennial. As you know, ceremonies were hosted by President Richard Linton's office on campus back in September, and those were mentioned on the program, commemorating the 100th anniversary of KSAC radio broadly, which would, of course, include Ag Today. And there has been a website created that has captured so much history about Agriculture Today, about everything that was presented over KSAC/KKSU radio over the many decades. And I would ask folks, if they'd like to take a little trip down memory lane, to go to the website and check out not only the written information there, but there is a ton of audio from the past at that website, which is really interesting to listen to. So the website is www.k-state.edu/Radio Centennial. Again, it's www.k-state.edu/Radio Centennial. Just take a few moments when you have moments to spare and call that up on your phone or on your tablet or on your home computer and check into that. I think they'll find it very entertaining, if nothing else.
That was former longtime host and producer of Agriculture Today, Eric Atkinson. I'd like to thank all of our longtime and new listeners of Agriculture Today for making this 100 years possible. We're cutting to a short break now on Agriculture Today, but we'll be right back.
This is Agriculture Today. Along with Shelby Varner, I'm Jeff Wickman. We end today's program with this week's milk lines. K-State dairy specialist Mike Brouk says that forage, stocking density, resting areas, and preventing injuries can help reduce stress in transition cows.
Today I'd like to visit with our Kansas dairy farmers concerning their transition cows and animals that are just post-fresh. As we look at how we impact our dairy cattle herd and the success of our dairy farms, paying careful attention to what we're doing just prior to calving as well as after calving is really important to the success of our animals. So you might think about it in this manner. These animals that are coming through transition and calving and then into early lactation, they're really like fine athletes. And you might even think about marathon runners as we look at the changes that they have to undergo in order to be successful coming through that change. In today's world, many of our animals, after they calve, within about a week, they're at 100 pounds of milk and sometimes even more than that. So tremendous milk production puts a tremendous strain on their ability to be successful. However, they have the genetics, and if we provide the right support for them, they can be very successful in this stressful time. So what are some key things that you need to think about? Well, a lot of times our thoughts go to nutrition, and that's important. Nutrition is a very important part of this total program. But the thing we often forget is that as we look at nutrition, one of the things that tends to hold these animals back is our forage qualities during this period of time. So having forages that are high quality and are digestible are very, very important as she tries to balance out her needs for energy and protein going through this phase. With increased feed costs, a lot of times people look very hard at the cost of additives in the diets. And during the transition and post-fresh phase, we tend to use a lot of additives like yeast and probiotics, fermentation products. There are different trace minerals and vitamins that are often recommended for use during this stressful time as well. And they do come with a cost. When we take those out of the diet, do we see a decrease in the performance of our animals coming through transition? Most cases, the answer to that would be yes. And as we look at our total environment that we put that animal in, we have to try to reduce the stress. So what's the number one stress that these animals generally face? Well, generally it's crowding. One of the first questions I will probably ask you if you call me about issues with your transition cows is, I want to know what your stocking density has been in your pre-fresh pen as well as your post-fresh pen. We know that animals thrive when those stocking densities are kept at 80% or less of capacity. We also know that heifers are much more successful if they are housed separate from cows during this critical time as well. So those are some things that we might want to consider as we consider trying to make our animals more successful. Finally, one of the things that we need to think about is the resting area that those animals actually are exposed to. Do you have comfortable stalls, comfortable bedding? And an important thing that is often overlooked is the flooring surface. Are your animals experiencing slips and falls? Just after calving, animals generally aren't as stable on their feet as they might be, and slick surfaces that they're walking on, if it results in slips and falls, there's greater chance of injury, thus reducing their performance as athletes. The final thing is thinking about moving these animals around during this phase. Many times animals are housed at different farms or different areas, and for loading them on trailers and unloading them off of trailers, there can be some issues with injury as they come on and off trailers. So being careful about how we do that, having non-slick surfaces for them to step on and off of, be very important. These are areas where mats can be helpful in trying to reduce the chances of injury. This is Mike Brouk with K-State Research and Extension, encouraging our dairy farms to carefully consider how transition cows, pre-fresh and post-fresh, are housed, as well as their nutritional programs so that they might be successful coming through the transition period.
Thanks, Mike. And that'll do it for this edition of Agriculture Today. For Shelby Varner, I'm Jeff Wickman. This is the K-State Radio Network.